The following video will concern a claim made by a YouTube channel that's been going on for over a decade. The claim is concerning health effects of an event that happened in 2011, March 11th. Nuclear disaster, Fukushima. 7 days afterwards, on the 17th, I'm trying to get the time and dates right here. Please bear with me. Radioactive isotope Cesium-134 was first detected off of the U.S. West Coast 1 week later in the air only. It did not make landfall in water. As quickly as it came in, it dispersed after there was less of the material coming out of the Fukushima disaster. You can look at a timeline for the Fukushima disaster to find out when it stopped emitting material into the air. Now, a person named Kevin Blanch posted on April 4th a video where he talked about his experiences and also may or may not have mentioned the Fukushima disaster that happened around a month earlier. Now, he claimed 35 years as a drywall worker or construction worker, etc. And it should be pointed out that he had, at the time, a website put up and also requests for donations from being basically a champion of the public interest, talking about people using substandard materials for doing repairs in buildings because he got tired of having to go through and undo people's bad work. Now, he later on added an addendum to the video saying that 190 days after I made this video, I got diagnosed with cancer. And he also implied or directly stated that it must have been caused by Fukushima. That placed it at October 12, 2011, 7 months afterwards, after the Fukushima disaster. The claim was acute myeloid leukemia and another cancer or whatever, multiple myeloma, which has a 54% survival rate. He blamed Fukushima nuclear disaster that had happened 7 months before by that point, apparently. And he had been told, and this is the quote, that he had less than a certain number of months to live. Now, I'm going to be addressing the statements he made, and the archives below will include what I'm citing here. The Fukushima disaster's next appearance on the west coast of the United States was in 2018, October 10th, almost exactly 7 years later. Cesium-134 again detected on seawater. Now, there are other things that were also released possible, but we're talking about the main thing when people say Fukushima radiation. They're talking about fallout, not direct rays from Fukushima. We have to state what type of radiation and what was it. Unless you inhale, swallow, or are skin exposed and eye exposed and somehow getting it into your body, any of these materials, they aren't exposed to you. Next, some of these can induce cancers of bone cancer, whatever. And you have to look up what those are. What's the most common cause of acute myeloid leukemia? It's acute. And what's the delay onset for radiation and or radioactive material? Radioactive material onset is based almost exclusively on exposure to fallout from atomic warheads detonated in Japan and Chernobyl. That's about it. Those are the only two really extreme excursions of radioactive material we have. Most of the deaths associated with them occurred from prompt radiation and burning or being annihilated. Now, I want to point out something about Fukushima that keeps getting ignored by people who are complaining about radiation and radioactive material. No deaths have been attributed to Fukushima from radiation until one person who'd been a worker in the industry for many years claimed it had to be Fukushima and it had to be the disaster so that they could get compensation, and the people making the decision decided to say, okay, to the family members, you're being compensated because we can't completely prove it wasn't caused by it. That's an extremely weak argument, but yes, you can kind of say a person died from radiation from Fukushima. A very large number of people died from an earthquake and tsunami that people don't want to discuss about this. A person died, and that's only if you do a gimme. Meanwhile, Chernobyl, which was a ridiculously large amount worse, happening over land instead of over the ocean where it can get diluted easily, that happened and that killed people. and will cause radiation sickness and damage X number of years later that shows up and could be attributed and very likely should be attributed. Okay. So we have Kevin Blanch claiming 7 months after exposure to, quote, radiation, he got cancer. Acute myeloid leukemia, and I'm mispronouncing it. Risk factors. Being older than a certain age and being male are the first on the list. Exposure to tobacco smoke. Did Kevin Blanch ever smoke? Next. Exposure specifically from that formaldehyde in the smoke is listed technically. The most common cause, however, is industrial exposure to benzene or compounds directly related to it, or benzene-containing compounds from hundreds of different things, mostly manufacturing and fuel processing. Chemotherapy drugs can also cause it. Radiation itself can cause it, but that's direct hard radiation, usually for treating another cancer, that causes it. We can only look up radiation-induced AML cancer as being radiation exposure, or from the nuclear bombs set off above Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and or exposure being downwind of literally Chernobyl. That's what we have to work with here. Radiation exposure, real radiation. Kept saying the word radiation. Radiation exposure causes AML after years after the exposure. This is very well documented. 5 years is the very common timing. About the time you don't die from whatever you were treating originally with radiation, you die from AML or start getting sick from it. Now, one of the things he said is he had X number of months to live. What's the actual death rate with treatment? Was he just quoting not being treated? Yes, if you have cancer and don't get treatment, you have a death wish. Or you're an American and you can't afford anything. Hence, I'm okay with him saying, hey, donate to me. I'm trying not to die from cancer. I have no problem with that in 2011. What's the 5-year survival rate if you're over 50? 25%. If you're younger than 40, 50%. What's the treatment without? What's the survival rate without treatment? Very low. Oh, by the way, it says X number of months or weeks. So yeah, if he says he was diagnosed that he was going to die, well, that was based on him not getting treatment. And I'm sorry, if you're an American, if you don't do a GoFundMe and beg for help, you should immediately put up a GoFundMe and say, yeah, I'm dying from cancer. If you want to donate, please do so. Because you're not going to get help from the medical system or the insurance companies. They will fight you tooth and nail sometimes. What's the survival rate at 10 years? Kevin Blanch is still alive if you're not aware of it. The survival rate, if it's AML, and you're over 60, is 2%. If you're under age 60, it's 17%. After that point, your life expectancy is that you will live to be 80, which means you actually have a slightly longer lifespan. Now, if you're not aware of what causes this statistic anomaly, if you're being treated for cancer, generally you're more paranoid about your health and you take better care of yourself. See also Kevin Blanch basically going vegan or vegetarian if needed and being willing to go that extra mile and literally go jogging while carrying, according to his videos, a chemotherapy bag duct taped to himself to not die from this. This gave him motivation. It's a weird thing, but people who don't die from some cancers because of lifestyle changes end up living longer than the average of American citizens in general. It doesn't mean that getting cancer makes you live longer. It means taking care of yourself makes you die less often. The max lifespan listing after age 50 is 80. It's only 2% survival rate at 10-year survival rate at age 60. That means if you were diagnosed at 50, how old was he? Again, what are the symptoms or causes or things? What are the things that cause AML? Smoking, being male, older. Okay, what about exposure to compounds? Formaldehyde, I can't pronounce it, another ahide. Drywall joint compounds contain formaldehyde. But radiation exposure takes 5 years. Being a drywall person or working in construction involving housing materials of any kind is listed as one of the risk factors to have AML. Or being blasted with, quote, radiation, real radiation, exposed ionizing radiation, is listed as a risk factor. Being downwind of a Cesium-134 source is actually not listed as a very strong indicator, and is not listed as a strong indicator after being exposed to radiation in general. See also the entirety of the United States getting blasted with radioactive material over many, many years during atom bomb tests. Coincidentally, where was he standing when he made that video that he was using as a reference point for the timing? Was he in Utah, on the other side of the mountain range, from where the airflow would have been from Fukushima? Was he standing, or did he do videos while visiting areas which exposed him to radioactive material from atom bomb tests from the 50s, which are still considered a safety hazard? Some of these places require that you sign off and say you can't sue the state of whatever because you're walking into a location that is contaminated. Was he an activist before this point about radiation and radioactive materials? These and other questions should be something he does as a video, since he does them all the damn time. He and Dana Dunford are the only two people who post anything about Fukushima anymore, except people like me debunking them. Pro tip, both of these individuals are notorious for not telling the truth about basic shit you can look up, and then either ignoring you when you point it out and continuing repeating a lie. At that point, it's a lie, not a mistake. Or getting mad at you for pointing out that they made a basic mistake about cause and effect. Claiming it was caused by, quote, radiation means I'm going to say, okay, you got it 7 months after the radiation source. That's not enough time. And if you're claiming it's from air, he was, at the time, supposedly on the other side of a mountain range, which would have filtered out over 99% of the material coming through. And if he's claiming it from landfall, that happened in 2018, so time travel? And again, he's now at the 10-year survival margin where, at this point, if he got this at 50, which is what if he's assuming it was a dreaded, horrible outcome, that means he was at 50 or older at the time. Okay, that's cool. That means he has another 20 years of life left because he's made lifestyle changes, and his likelihood of dying, well, his likelihood of survival is 2.4%. His likelihood of dying from this thing is probably very low now, because it hasn't killed him yet at 10 years. His original GoFundMe and other eBeg-me things were basically because he was pointing out that other drywall people were leaving work for him to fix that should have never happened. That tilting at windmill is acceptable. In fact, a good thing. Max lifespan being 80 years, he'll probably live to be 80 and be just as cranky. I don't think it was caused by Fukushima. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.